Hi guys, welcome back to Leave No Weeds. I'm Stephanie. There's my email down below. Send me your questions, comments, helpful tips. I'll take anything. Let's talk. All right, today on this section 2 of Leave No Weeds, we're going to go over terminology that will play into this program. One of those is weeds, native plants, noxious weeds, and invasive plants. All of these terms are very important when we learn to decipher between the differences of plants. So let's get to it. To review, on the last section, we were looking at a picture from the North Hills. The one on the left was taken in 1974. The one on the right was somewhere around 2010. Okay, and the one on the left, we said, was a healthy plant community because of a certain term I wanted you to remember, and that was biodiversity, meaning there's a lot of different plants growing in that area, and this makes it a healthy plant community. Then we look to the picture on the right, and this is lacking biodiversity. When I look at this, I see some grasses, which is good, but I also notice a bunch of little dead stickly plants scattered around within those grasses. And if you look really close, you can see a greenish yellow plant that's mixed in with this grass community. And those were what we talked about last time at the end of the session, weeds. Okay, so let's jump right to it. What defines a weed? So we're looking at this picture of a field of dandelions. And one might say, oh, that's a field of weeds. And to some, that might be a field of weeds, but to others, it might not be. Okay. How many of you think a dandelion is a weed? I think you're too young to think a dandelion's a weed. Okay. I like dandelions. I don't like them in my yard, but I like them as a little flower. So, what defines a weed? Why do some people call dandelions weeds? Well, a definition of a weed is any unwanted plant. And you get to determine what you think is a weed based on what you want growing somewhere. And for the reason most adults consider dandelions a weed is because they don't want it growing in their backyards, which they primarily only want grass. So when this cute little yellow flower shows up, everyone gets all crazy and upset that the weeds are taking over their yard because they don't want it growing there. So the simple definition of a weed is any unwanted plant. Again, I don't want you guys to think dandelions are a weed. I think, as I move myself across the screen, that you should be enjoying dandelions. I am an old person, but I still color my skin yellow when I find a dandelion. I still pop its head off. I like to blow the seeds. So you shouldn't have to worry about a dandelion at this point. When you look at a dandelion, you should look at it as a field of wishes, not a field of weeds. So now we know what a weed definition is. It's any unwanted plant. Now I'd like to talk about what you think the definition of a native plant might be. And obviously I've written it down below, the real definition, that plants are indigenous to a given area. Well, what does that mean, Stephanie? And I like you to think about it this way. If I would ask all of you to raise your hand if you were born in Montana, okay, and you raised your hand and you were said you were born in Montana, you would be native to our state. Okay, and then I could say, how many of you were not born in Montana? And I would raise my hand and I would say, I'm not native to Montana, I'm native to Iowa. Okay, so I didn't originate in Montana. The native plants in this picture are native to Montana. That means nobody brought them here, they've always been here, and they are adapted to our climate and our weather and how everything functions around here. So they are native to Montana. They're native plants. And it's why I love to live in Montana. I love our native plants. Okay. We also have non-native plants. And here's a picture of two examples. One is of our native plant and another is of a non-native plant. Do you think that all non-native plants then mean that they're a bad thing if you see them in Montana? Not necessarily. Okay, so we need to know that we have native plants that can grow naturally here and always have been here, but we also have, and we see, and we have options to plant non native plants. And we do this because we enjoy what they look like, and that's okay. Occasionally, though, we get these non native plants that tend to become invasive. And invasive plants tend to spread out of control in an area and then have a tendency to harm the plant communities that they're in. And when we get to that level of a non native plant growing out of control and causing problems, the government tends to step in. And what we can do as the government on the government level is list specific non native plants that are invasive as noxious weeds. Okay, so this is kind of confusing because you can't call any weed a noxious weed. A dandelion, not a noxious weed. No matter how much grandma and grandpa tell you, it's a terrible weed. You can't call it a noxious weed. It has to be put on a list by our government, by the Montana Department of Agriculture, actually. People can petition plants to be on this list, and then they go through a scientific review where you study the impacts that these non native invasive plants have. And then, if they are deemed to cause a lot of harm to our agriculture, our forestry, our wildlife, our livestock, and our native plant communities, then we can label it as a noxious weed. Currently, we have 36 state listed noxious weeds for the state of Montana. Does that seem like a lot? If you have all 36, it seems like a huge problem, but not everyone has all 36. But there are 36 non-native invasive plants that have been labeled noxious weeds on our state list. So 36 noxious weeds, non-native noxious weeds. If they're not native, where do you think they came from? So here's a picture of all of the continents. And we know, if you follow my cursor, that they're not native to North America. Okay, these 36 noxious weeds. Where do you think a majority of them came from? I don't know, Stephanie. Where? Well, I can tell you that a majority of them came from these continents. And in the weed world, we call that Eurasia. Okay, we just lob them together because it's difficult to pinpoint exactly where each specific noxious weed is from. So we just say Eurasia. Majority of the 36 noxious weeds that are impacting Montana come from Europe and Asia. So why do these non-native plants cause problems? I don't know. If you think about that, why would a non-native plant cause a problem? How would one figure out before planting something that this non-native plant would cause a problem? Why do these non-native plants cause problems? Well, when they're introduced to these new locations, the environmental checks and balances that are needed to keep these plants under control are not in that new native range. What does that mean, Stephanie? Well, that means the weather is different. Maybe it's warmer here in Montana than where this plant was from. So it gets here and it's like, this weather is great. I'm able to get so much bigger because it's warmer longer. Therefore, I can create more flowers to produce more seeds. And maybe that plant disease that was taking me out in Europe is not here in Montana. So I'm able to grow even bigger and better. That bug that was eating my flower head is not here. So look how big and pretty I can get. So the lack of these environmental checks and balances is what makes these non-native plants become invasive. And when that happens and these natural enemies are not here, and we as humans realize it, it tends to cause us economic and social impacts. So it costs us money to try to control them and take away the harm that they are causing. So how do you think these non-native plants originally got here? The first records of noxious weeds in Montana are from the 1890s, and in Missoula about 1920, and that was of spotted knapweed. So that's a long time ago. So if we go back to the definition of native and non-native, and we think about it in regards to humans, if we were going to be specific about the peoples that were native to North America, it would be our Native American population. I am a non-native descendant to North America. My family immigrated from Germany and Norway and Sweden. So I believe that some of these non-native species probably came over to America when all of the immigrants were coming to the new land. They hitched a ride, okay? These people didn't do this on purpose thinking they're going to bring this new species to their new host country and have it be a harmful thing. They brought it for crop purposes, for the beauty of the plant, and for many other reasons and uses, with no expectation of it being a problem. So they hitched the ride. They got here. Another thing to think about is all of the immigrants coming over on ships. A little fact that you guys can think about is the ships were balanced by bringing water into the ballast or the underside of a boat. So when they're in Europe or Asia, and the boat is filling with water to level out, it's filling with water from the surrounding ocean there. Then it goes across the ocean into America, and then they let that water out to level the boat out. That could possibly be another way that some of these species have gotten here and still get here today. Let's go on to another one. They came in contaminated seed. That still happens again today. There are non-native species that contaminate crop seeds. There are non-native seeds that contaminate those packets of wildflower mixes that you can buy at some of the box stores. And I would like to tell you to all stay away from those, because indeed they do have species in them that have the potential to cause problems in Montana. We think knapweed came in contaminated hay. So knapweed is one of the very first noxious weeds that our state has been battling, and we think it indeed came in contaminated hay. Then in the bottom corner, I have escaped from gardens. What do you think that means? Is it like these plants were like, this pretty garden isn't good enough for me, I'm going to jump the fence and head on up on those beautiful hillsides? No, it's not like that. It's not like somebody breaking out of jail. It's that we go to the nurseries and we buy these beautiful plants. We plant them because they're beautiful. We enjoy them, and that's great, without knowing sometimes what their growing characteristics are like. And so sometimes we buy plants, plant them in our garden, and they tend to spread outside of our garden boundaries. And that still happens today. And you can see evidence of that on our hillsides, is that there were plants that were planted because of their beauty, and now they have escaped and started to cause problems. So these are all different reasons why these non-native plants got here. You know, it wasn't on purpose, and now we've identified them, and now it's time to take action. And that's all we're going to talk about in this section. Again, there's my email. Shoot me an email if you have a question or a comment, and we'll communicate, and I'll see you in the next section. Thanks.